When things get tough, especially during conflicts, looking at the past can sometimes feel like looking right into a mirror. Today, we're exploring Thucydides, an Athenian from way back, whose insights about power, fear, and what drives people still feel incredibly sharp today. His big work, The History of the Peloponnesian War, it's not just some dusty old book.
Oh, absolutely not.
It's fundamental. You find it everywhere. Universities, military colleges, strategists still study it. Really shows how powerful his ideas were, and still are.
And we're going to explore how Thucydides' own life, which was pretty eventful, really shaped how he wrote history. His whole approach was groundbreaking. He wanted to write something, a possession for all time, as he put it.
A possession for all time. I like that.
And we'll see why his take on politics and just, well, human nature still holds vital lessons for you today, even centuries later.
Okay, so let's start with the man himself. Thucydides, what do we actually know about him?
Well, the interesting thing is, most of what we know for sure comes from Thucydides himself, from his own writing.
He tells us directly.
Pretty much. He says he's an Athenian, son of Olorus from Helmus, which was like a district of Athens. And he was definitely involved. He fought in the Peloponnesian War. He even lived through that terrible plague of Athens.
He survived the plague. Wow.
He did. And he actually made this incredibly early observation about immunity, noticing that people who got sick and recovered could then care for others without getting it again. Quite astute.
So he's right there experiencing these massive events firsthand. And he wasn't just some ordinary soldier either, was he? I heard he had some resources.
He was a man of considerable means, owned gold mines up in Thrace at a place called Skaptahyle.
Gold mines, okay.
Yeah, so that probably gave him the financial independence he needed to dedicate himself to his history project. It wasn't just a side gig for him.
Right. Makes sense. But being involved directly also led to a major turning point, didn't it? His time as a general, a strategos, at Phasos in 424 BC. What went wrong there?
That was absolutely pivotal. So the Spartan general, Brasidas, a very capable commander, made a move on Amphipolis, a really important city for Athens. Thucydides was stationed nearby on Thasos with ships and was sent to relieve the city.
But he didn't make it in time.
Brasidas was incredibly quick. He knew Thucydides was influential in the area and was coming, so he offered the people of Amphipolis very generous terms to surrender before Thucydides could arrive, and they took the deal.
Ouch. And the consequences for Thucydides?
Severe. He was exiled from Athens for 20 years.
20 years for that one failure.
It seems harsh, but Amphipolis was strategically vital. However, this exile, this personal disaster, paradoxically became crucial for his work. He said it himself.
What did he say?
He wrote something like, being present with both parties, and more especially with the Peloponnesians by reason of my exile, I had leisure to observe affairs somewhat particularly. Exile forced him out, but also gave him this incredible access.
So he could talk to the other side, the Spartans and their allies.
Exactly. He got perspectives most Athenians would never have had access to. It gave his history a unique depth and balance. It really does make you pause and think how sometimes, a major setback can unexpectedly open up a whole new way of seeing things.
Definitely. What about the end of his life, though? Is that clearer?
That's where things get a bit fuzzy. There are different stories. Some say he was murdered coming back to Athens after the exile ended. Others that he died up near his mines in Skaptahyle.
And the history itself just stops. Right?
It does, rather abruptly, in 411 BC. Many connect that sudden stop to his death. So the end of his own story is a bit of a mystery.
Okay, so his life clearly feeds into his work. He's often called the father of scientific history. Now, that sounds impressive, but what does it actually mean? Especially for you, trying to make sense of news and events today.
It's about his method, really. Thucydides was revolutionary because he applied these, incredibly strict standards. He aimed for impartiality. He focused intensely on evidence, on figuring out cause and effect.
And crucially, no gods.
Precisely. Unlike Herodotus before him, Thucydides doesn't explain events through divine intervention. It's all about human actions, human decisions, human failures. That was a massive shift. And remember that phrase, a possession for all time. He wasn't writing for quick applause. He started his history right when the war began in 431 BC because he was convinced right from the start that this conflict was incredibly significant, more so than any before it.
How did he gather his information then, if he was aiming for this kind of accuracy?
He put huge value on eyewitness accounts. He talked to people who were there. He consulted written documents when he could find them, which wasn't always easy then. He interviewed participants from both sides, thanks in part to his exile.
And he was selective.
Very. He made a conscious choice to leave out things he saw as maybe frivolous isn't the right word, but extraneous. He focused laser-like on politics and war. You don't get much about art or literature or the general social scene from Thucydides.
Right. But here's something that seems a bit contradictory then. The speeches. He includes these long, formal speeches, but admits they aren't word-for-word transcripts. How does that square with his focus on facts?
That's a really sharp question, and it puzzles people. But think about it, in an era that was still heavily reliant on oral tradition, how do you capture the arguments, the mood, the justifications people gave?
You couldn't just play back a recording.
Exactly. So the speeches were his way to sort of rescue these crucial political moments from being lost. He aimed to convey the general sense of what was said, the core arguments. The prime example is Pericles' funeral oration.
Ah, yes, famous speech.
It is. It's this powerful defense of Athenian democracy honoring the war dead. It includes that incredible line, "The whole earth is the sepulchre of famous men." It's about memory living on not just in stone, but in the hearts and minds of men. Powerful stuff.
But then, doesn't he immediately follow that with something completely different?
He does, and the contrast is stunning. Right after Pericles' inspiring words about Athenian glory, Thucydides gives this horrifyingly detailed account of the plague of Athens.
Talk about whiplash.
It's incredibly effective. It grounds the lofty ideals in the brutal reality of human suffering and mortality. It gives his account this intense feeling of reality, of verisimilitude. He even notes how people started reinterpreting old prophecies to fit the plague, confusing the Greek words for plague and famine because the plague was what they were experiencing now. Shows how immediate suffering shapes memory.
So his approach was rigorous, evidence-based, but also deeply attuned to human psychology and the power of rhetoric, even if reconstructed. If he were looking at our world today, what kind of evidence do you think he'd be zeroing in on, trying to cut through all the noise?
That's a great way to frame it. I suspect he'd dismiss a lot of the surface chatter. He'd be looking for the underlying motives, the strategic calculations, the expressions of fear and self-interest, maybe in official statements, but also in actions.
Which brings us to political realism. He's called the father of that school of thought. What does political realism actually entail based on his work?
At its core, it's the idea that states, and maybe even individuals in the political sphere, are driven primarily by fear and self-interest. Not by morals, not by ideals, not by appeals to justice, but by the hard realities of power and survival.
So forget noble intentions.
Pretty much, according to this view. Thucydides examined human behavior under extreme stress plague, massacres, war, and saw these fundamental drives laid bare. Think about his description of the civil war on Corcyra. It's brutal. Factions slaughtering each other. He famously says, "War is a violent teacher." Pelenvios, Dysklos. It strips away pretense.
And his view on leaders and democracy. You mentioned Pericles.
Right. He deeply admired Pericles. Saw him as a true leader who could guide the Athenian democracy effectively, who wasn't swayed by the crowd but could command its respect.
But not the leaders who came after Pericles.
No, he had a clear distaste for the demagogues, the popular leaders he saw as manipulating the people for their own ends after Pericles died. This has led some people, like the philosopher Karl Popper, to argue Thucydides had an involuntary bias against the more radical democracy that emerged. He seemed to think democracy only really worked with a strong, wise leader at the helm.
Interesting. So maybe not perfectly impartial on that front.
It's a valid point. His own aristocratic background and his experiences might have colored his view there. His thinking was also influenced by the sophists, philosophers who questioned traditional ideas about morality and justice. He seems fascinated by the limits of human reason, the role of chance or fortune versus necessity, and ultimately suggests history might be too irrational, too unpredictable to forecast accurately.
That feels incredibly modern, that view of states acting out of self-interest and fear. Is basically the foundation of a lot of international relations theory today.
Absolutely. His Melian dialogue is Exhibit A. It's still required reading in IR courses.
Well, remind us about that one.
It's a negotiation between the powerful Athenians and the people of Melos, a small, neutral island they want to conquer. The Melians appeal to justice, fairness, the gods. The Athenians basically say, look, justice only matters between equals, otherwise. The strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must.
Chilling.
It is. It's a stark, unvarnished look at power politics.
So if you're trying to understand, say, a current international dispute, applying that Thucydidean lens means looking past the stated ideals and asking, what
Well,
are the power dynamics? What are the core fears? What are the underlying interests?
precisely. It's a pragmatic, sometimes uncomfortable, but often revealing way to analyze things.
Okay, let's talk legacy. How has this way of thinking, this Thucydidean perspective, echoed through history right up to our time?
The impact is immense. The historian J.B. Bury said Thucydides' work was the longest and most decisive step ever taken by one person to make history what it is now. He set a benchmark. Later Greek and Roman historians looked to him as a model. And as we mentioned, he's seen as a founding figure of political realism in the West, alongside thinkers like Machiavelli and Thomas Hobbes. Howitt actually made the first English translation directly from the Greek in the 17th century, clearly seeing parallels with the political turmoil of his own time.
And this continued into more recent times.
Oh, yes. His focus on objectivity resonated strongly with 19th century historians who aimed for scientific history. Then, in the 20th century, especially during the Cold War, his ideas about power politics became hugely influential in international relations theory. Thinkers like Hans Morgenthau drew heavily on him. Figures like Henry Kissinger were inspired by his analysis.
So he's read at the highest levels of strategy and policymaking.
Definitely. He's standard reading at places like the U.S. Naval War College. Irving Kristol even called his work the favorite neoconservative text on foreign affairs.
Quite a claim. But he's often compared to Herodotus, right? The other father of history. How do they differ?
It's a classic comparison. Thucydides is all about the political and military narrative, cause and effect, factual reporting, that realist edge. Herodotus, whom Cicero first called the father of history, took a broader approach. He included ethnography, geography, stories, moral lessons, much more of a wide-ranging inquiry into the human world.
So two different ways of doing history.
Exactly. And today, historians tend to see value in both approaches. We recognize that understanding society, culture, beliefs, the Herodotean stuff is crucial for fully understanding the political and military events that Thucydides focused on. They complement each other.
It makes you think, when you're trying to understand something complex yourself, which approach feels more essential? The hard truths of power that Thucydides reveals, or the broader human context Herodotus provides? Or maybe you absolutely need both. We've journeyed through the world of Thucydides, a man whose own challenging life forged a truly distinct way of looking at war, power, and what makes people tick.
His dedication to careful observation, while never losing sight of those powerful forces like fear and self-interest, it holds up a mirror that's, well, still pretty revealing about us and our world.
So think about this as we finish. In our time, with so many competing stories and explanations swirling around, what does Thucydides push you to look at more critically? What are you searching for to find those insights that might truly last, like a possession for all time?